So good morning to everyone that's here. Welcome. My name is Sadhna, and I'm the outreach lead with Biotechnology Los Angeles. And I'm just going to quickly introduce today's event. So I'll be sharing my screen. Okay. So welcome to the Bio Entrepreneurship Seminar Series, and welcome to the very first installment. Today, you'll be hearing about Alan Horsager's story. He's the director of LA BioSpace at Cal State LA, and our talk today is titled Biotechnology Entrepreneur Story, Advice to Future Entrepreneurs. And this event is in collaboration with LA Bioscience Hub. But before I tell you more about them, I'm gonna show you a little bit about BCLA if you don't already know about us. We are a team of 20 plus team members, and we're mostly students, graduate students, and postdoctoral scientists, and we've been around for 6 years. In that time, we've gathered over 6,000 subscribers to our newsletter, and we've had 100 plus partnerships with biotech organizations and companies in the Los Angeles area. So we're very passionate about what we do. We have a mission, which is to inspire, educate, and connect emerging scientists and entrepreneurs to grow and diversify biotech in LA. And some of you may have attended our events in the past. We host networking mixers, seminars, panels, and career conferences. And if you haven't, I invite you to join us at one of our future events. Here is a very short representation of all the companies in the Los Angeles area that we have collaborated with and invited speakers from. So please do come and invite your friends. And with that, I'm going to introduce our event partner for today from LA Bioscience Hub. Jordanos Gabritatios is the executive director of the LA Bioscience Hub. And I will now let her take it from here and introduce the rest of the event.
Thank you, Sadhna. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Sadhna mentioned, my name is Jordanos, and I'm the Executive Director at LA Bioscience Hub. We're a geographically focused nonprofit focused on the east side of LA and the bioscience community on the east side. This is our 5th summer doing the entrepreneurship seminars as part of Biotech Leaders Academy. And our purpose with this webinar series is really to demystify the entrepreneurial process and hear from experts about the necessary aspects of launching a biotech company. I do want to just share a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them using the Q&A feature in your Zoom control panel. We'll be taking questions. Alan will be taking questions throughout the presentation, so you don't have to save them for the end. So I'll go ahead and introduce, we're really fortunate to have Dr. Alan Horsager, Director of LA BioSpace at Cal State LA. He leads the university's efforts there to foster an inclusive entrepreneurship program, and he provides new entrepreneurs with workspace, resources, and training. Alan has spent more than a decade building life science companies in oncology, ophthalmology, and reproductive health fields. And his first startup was EOS Neuroscience, and more recently, he was the co-founder and CEO of Epsona. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Alan.
Thanks, Jordanos. Thanks, Adna. Pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. So I think what I'll do is just give a very brief background on myself, and then I want to talk a little bit about LA Biospace, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail about the 2 companies that I co-founded, EOS and Epsona. And as Jordanos mentioned, please, by all means, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. And so we can integrate them into the conversation. So that way they're timely and addressed at the right time. So background, so I did my undergrad at the University of Washington in psychology, and then did my PhD at USC in neuroscience. And I've worked for 2 medical device companies in varying capacities. One was a company called Viva, which had essentially an ambulatory monitoring device. It was a device called the Life Shirt. It was essentially the equivalent of this guy, but it would be worn. It's like a vest that was connected to a Palm Pilot. And that would measure respiratory and cardiac output, and it was used for clinical endpoints in clinical trials, as well as monitoring first responders and training for professional and collegiate athletes. And after that, I went to do my PhD at USC, and then during that time, I worked with the company Second Sight Medical Products, which developed the retinal prosthesis, which ultimately got to market. The company went public, and I don't know how many patients have been implanted with it, but there was a interesting ride seeing that. I was working with the first 10 patients or 6 patients that were implanted with this device. So it was an electrical stimulator that went into the eye and would stimulate the retina, which are the neural tissue that helps you see in the eye. But then in these patients' cases, their photoreceptors had died off, and this provides a way of restoring some sight through essentially a brain-machine interface. So really exciting project. So I worked with the patients, a combination of psychophysics and computational modeling was the focus of my PhD. And as a function of that, got very interested. I think before that I was interested in entrepreneurship, but I always thought I was going to come right back out and work for companies. But I actually got very excited about being in academia during that time as well, because I liked the research a lot. And so I stayed on at USC at the end and continued on as a research faculty there and applied for grants and ended up getting a Cassie Award from the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, which is a nice award, competitive award. It's designed to transition people from postdoctoral roles to full-time tenure-track faculty positions. But as the case may be, at the same time I had became interested in another company and started another company, which was EOS Neuroscience. And that's why I was splitting my time between my role at USC and this company, essentially 50-50, and actually technically 51% at the company and 49% at the university, so that I could be the PI on SBIRs for EOS. So yeah, a big split in time. That company was focused on another application in treating blindness. There was a gene therapy for blindness where we were taking a gene from an algae that would be introduced into any mammalian tissue, but in our case, retinal cells, and specifically on bipolar cells, to make them light sensitive. So after you lose your photoreceptors and the eye can't capture light, the idea was to make other cells in the eye light sensitive in a circuit-specific way, so that you maintain the natural structure of the retina and take advantage of the natural structure of the retina to restore vision. And I'll tell you more about that in a bit. And then after that, I started another company called Episona, which was a molecular diagnostics company focused on infertility, specifically male infertility. So we were looking at epigenetic changes in sperm DNA. And epigenetics, that encompasses a number of different things, but it's things that control and regulate the way DNA expresses its protein. So in every cell of your body, you have identical sets of DNA and genes, but only certain genes are activated in certain cell types, right? And this is a function of epigenetics. And so there's normal epigenetic control, and then this can become dysregulated. And so we were looking for dysregulation in sperm, and trying to use that to understand how that impacted fertility, both from a fertilization standpoint and early embryo development. And again, I'll talk more about that in a bit. And then I spent a very brief amount of time consulting with LEK in their diagnostics and tools group, which was fun, but not for me. and then came back out pretty quickly and started with LA Biospace about 5 months ago. And so I just want to say a little bit about that. So LA Biospace is a life science incubator that's associated with Cal State LA. And we have a facility, a 20,000 square foot facility that will have wet lab capabilities as well as office space. And we're going to be looking to focus on life science companies at the early stage. So anybody that comes from maybe even as early as ideation all the way through Series A. And so we're looking to do both incubation and perhaps developing specific accelerator programs in very targeted areas, such as immunotherapy. And we're also extremely, because of where we're at, Cal State LA and East Los Angeles, we take diversity very seriously, and inclusive entrepreneurship is very important to us. So we want to focus on creating companies and helping support companies that represent the diversity that we see in Los Angeles. So that means 50% women, 50% Latinx, and a good distribution of age as well as socioeconomic. So that's important to us as well. So we're at the point where we're finishing up the construction, and we'll start housing companies in early 2021. So that'll be another 6 months from now. So excited to get started. So if anybody's out there and has a company and thinking of developing, please, feel free to contact us if you think the timing could align. So, okay, so let me circle back to the companies. So I think it makes sense just to focus on the two companies that I co-founded and dive into them a little bit more detail. So I came at it, I think it was probably kind of mid-20s when I started with Viva, which was that first medical device company that I worked with. And I still was at a point where I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. Right? I thought, it's kind of interesting, but I thought, and then I got really inspired by the work that they were doing. And I thought, and then I just learned what it meant to be a biotech or technology focused in healthcare company, and realized, okay, I want to go back and do my PhD. So I went back to do my PhD, and I really wanted to focus on, I was really interested in neuroscience because of myself. I did essentially biopsych when I did my undergrad, and I really wanted to do something in brain-machine interfacing. I thought that was particularly interested. So I talked to Jerry Loeb originally about the cochlear implant work that he had done at USC. And then I saw a talk by this guy named Jim Weiland, who is a faculty in biomedical engineering at USC, about this thing called the retinal prosthesis. And I just became enamored with it and talked to them about what if this is something I could get involved with. And I had a little bit of regulatory background at this point too. And so they thought that could be interesting as they were becoming a more clinical product. They had some phase 1 stuff going on. And then, so got involved with that project and did my PhD focused, like I said, in psychophysics, working with these patients. And one of the things with the retinal prosthesis that I saw was that it provided some electrical stimulation to the retina in kind of an indiscriminate way. So I thought, and if you think of neuroscience, you think about it from a bunch of different angles, but the neurons themselves and the way they connect to other neurons and communicate information across networks, that's pretty important. And so I always thought it's really important to take advantage of that network. And so I then found out that towards the tail end of my PhD about this field of optogenetics. And optogenetics, again, is this idea of taking these proteins from algae, or genes that produce proteins from algae, and they're basically channels that are light sensitive. And so when they get hit with light, they'll open up and allow you to depolarize tissue, activate the tissue. And I thought, okay, and then I realized too that you could what's called genetically target them. So you could get them to express and be activated in very specific cell types. And I thought, oh my God, this is exactly what we need. We need to be specific, and this is the tool we could use. And so I reached out to the people that had developed, or at least translated this technology to neuroscience. So that was Ed Boyden, who was at Stanford at the time, and then became a professor at MIT. Thought, okay, I'll go do a postdoc with Ed at MIT. And he said, well, maybe what we want to do is actually think about starting a company. And so we talked about it some more, and I was very interested in the entrepreneurial side of things, and said, okay, let's do that. And so Ed, I had a little bit of business experience, but not very much, but we brought in a third co-founder, Ben Mateo, who had come from McKinsey. So he had a little bit more business experience, and consulting is not necessarily business experience, but Ben is very smart, and we have a fair amount of business experience at least relative to Ed and myself. So the three of us, certainly got excited about it and worked really well together and formed EOS Neuroscience. And so we thought about what the thing should look like and who should be involved. And there were a number of people really excited about this space. And so we really focused externally on developing collaborative relationships with a number of different people. And some of those collaborative relationships definitely turned into true collaborations. And there are other points of like deviation in the ideology of how things should work. And this comes into play with my another company, the Episona, what I'll talk about in a little bit.
Can I ask you an audience question at this point? I think it's a good moment for that. This is a great story. I'm excited to hear it. You're a graduate student. You reach out to a scientist. It's kind of a cold call, it sounds like, to Ed Boyden.
Yeah.
And you are now an entrepreneur. And so this question is great, is what opportunities did having a PhD give you as opposed to just a bachelor's or a master's? So presumably there's audience members who maybe aren't considering graduate degrees, or maybe they are. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I mean, I think, fundamentally a PhD does give you a little bit of an opening sometimes, where like, I think it's improved. I think that people can be, I'm just speaking frankly here. I think people can be snooty and say, oh, you don't have a PhD, so you can't possibly know what you're talking about. And I don't want to abuse the academic world, but the academic world, I feel like, can be particularly bad here. I think in industry it's a little better. And I know a number of master's students that are extremely capable, as well as bachelors. Like at the end of the day, it's about the quality of the idea and your ability to communicate that idea and build alignment around that idea. That's how you start, period. So as long as you have the capacity to understand that technology, look, so broadly, life science companies are really highly technical and require a huge amount of understanding of that technical capability. And investors will get really deep in that. They love to pretend that they don't, oh, we're dumb and we don't know anything, but they know way better. They are smart, they're the smartest people in the room most of the time, and they know a lot more than the companies probably do. So communicating your knowledge and making them help them understand what it is you're trying to do is critical. And so while a PhD helps with that, I think, particularly investors are probably less biased about that. I think they're much more open to the entrepreneur being from any type of background, including educational background. So I think you're going to see bias there. Ignore it. If you have the capability of communicating the idea clearly and building alignment, who cares, right? That's what you need to do. Hopefully that answers the question at least a little bit.
Thank you. I hope so.
Yeah.
We'll see if there's a follow-up.
Yeah. So should we continue with the question? Should I keep going with the, am I going too deep, or how should I?
I think I want to hear more about what happens with your entrepreneurial experience, your very first one, just after graduate school. And I want to encourage anyone that's listening, everyone that's listening, to put their questions in a chat. We'll interrupt Alan every now and then, and we'll give him a question from the audience. So feel free to write your questions down.
I'll count on you to interrupt.
Yes.
Okay. So we developed, we started two parallel paths. One is developing relationships with academic partners, right, and to fill out the expertise. We really wanted to build the best possible team that you couldn't say no to, at least scientifically and academically. And so we brought a lot of really good people in. So people from the University of Florida. We were working, trying to engage with some folks from Max Planck on this as well. And so we really tried to figure out where all of the ideas were coming from and tried to build some collaborative effort. And of course, some of those folks really wanted to do their own thing. There was, deviations in ideology. And so, you do what you can there. And at the same time, we were trying to raise capital from investors. And I think the most important thing that we did there is we got together with Wilson Sonsini, and that was a law firm. You need someone that has access to investors, and as graduate students, you typically do not, right? And so you need someone that's going to provide warm introductions. And I think in my experience, the best have been particularly good law firms, and and a particular partner. So ours was Vern Norville, and he was the guy in biotech, and he just knew everybody and created a lot of introductions. So we were able to get into just about everybody for conversations when we went out. And I would say that we were making traction with that. So this was, I did finish my PhD in 2009, to give you a sense, and this may date, maybe I don't know who's on, what the demographics look like on this seminar, but 2008 we had a pretty big economic disruption. The economy really fell apart. We had what's called the Great Recession, and so as we were talking to investors, I'm not going to necessarily fully blame it on this. I think we were high risk from a founder perspective. We were high risk because none of us had built a company before. The technology was super high risk, right? And we were very early, right? We haven't even established proof of concept yet at this point, right? So there's a bunch of risk involved. But at the same time, people were listening, and some were gaining some interest. But then the economy really fell apart. And so investors really, and they're doing it, I think, to some degree today too, and it's not the right thing to do. They tend to circle their wagon and say, okay, what is going to, nobody knows what's going to happen here economically. So what do we do? So we circle our wagons, make sure our current portfolio is well protected and to sustain this, because we want, we've made investments. We want those investments to be successful. So we circle our wagons and take care of them. And that one was really prolonged, right? It lasted a few years, and so that made it very difficult. So in parallel, we were doing this anyway. We focused on grant funding, and we ultimately raised about $2 million in grants. So we were able to get a fair amount of capital in, and so we did build some small company. We had 2 or 3 hires. Essentially most exclusively scientific, and developed our proof of concept, which I won't go into a lot of detail, but that proof of concept was actually fairly compelling for people. That helped and really push things along. I think where things, go ahead.
Can I ask you, there's another audience question, because I'm hearing you talking about hiring and bringing people on board, and the question is, how do you describe building alignment? So it's a very short question. I don't know what that means to you.
It's a long answer.
But maybe you have a long answer for it. So keep the questions coming, and I'll let Alan.
Yeah, so the alignment question is a good one. I think, it's a combination of getting people excited about your particular vision and idea of what the product and company look like, and having them inspired and wanting to be part of that journey. And you, to some degree, I'm going to talk out both sides of my mouth here. You need to be inflexible on that to maintain that vision. That's really important. That's an important component of being a CEO too. You want to make sure that you keep the vision clear and stable, so that it's not bouncing around too much. You need to pivot when you need to pivot, but you want to maintain that. But at the same time, as you're going through that, if you hear new information and you find a partner where you're trying to build alignment, or if there's a partner, then you think, oh my God, their ideas are fantastic. We need to rethink what we're doing and adjust accordingly and engage with them. Then you need to adjust and do it that way. I mean, so it's part of it's getting people excited about your particular vision, but also getting people to be, taking other people's input in and using that to adjust how you see the world, right? So it might be that, that we weren't thinking about this properly. So, and then there's just the relations component, right? I think you're going to be dealing with the relations with the external partner alignment. You're going to be dealing with relations with your team, your internal team. You're going to be doing that with investors. You're going to be doing that with your board. And I'm not saying you tell different stories to different people. And in fact, it's generally the same story, but you're going to have to manage all of those relationships. And all of those people are people. And all those people have their own specific types of concerns and depth, right? So, or how deep they want to go into certain issues. So you need to think about that. So I think managing those relationships is key. But building alignment, I think, is a combination of getting people excited about your story as well as taking their input in and adjusting a story as needed.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I've lost track of where I was, but so we did our proof of concept work. We were trying to establish validation by going into larger animal models. And so this was not to get into the details, but this was a gene therapy that was targeting a very specific cell type. And so there's all sorts of technical considerations here that make it very difficult. And we were running extremely lean, right? We basically had single shots on goal. And so we were trying to get this protein to express in different animal models. And we just couldn't get it to work, right? We got it to work really well in a mouse model. Everything works in mice, right? But that was actually pretty tricky, but we got that to work. But we didn't have a heck of a lot of shots on goal and ability to adjust in the larger animal models. And so it really started to stagnate there. And at the same time, it just became harder and harder to raise capital as we kept going forward. And so it just, unfortunately, it became difficult. We just couldn't get the technology to translate. And so we essentially stalled out. Right. And so at that point I said, okay, I was trying to debate about what I do next. And so I was debating whether I would stay in academia and follow through with my, Bros Welcome Fund award, or go and do another startup.
There's an audience question that is basically leading you into what you're going to say, which is, what is the most important factor you considered when you decided to switch from academia to industry? Is that where you're going next?
Yeah, well, it's certainly part of it. I think I have no regrets necessarily about it, but I can see how you can develop an academic career that has a tie to industry and startups. You can do that, but the flip side is that you can have a career in industry where you're tied to, you have relationships with academia. And so you can have a foot in both worlds. It just depends on what you like more. And I enjoyed the team building component, which I know you can do in academia as well, but I liked building the company and building something from scratch and seeing it become its own living animal, and I liked seeing that happen. And I've always been very firm. I really believe that the work that we're doing in the lab, at least in the life sciences, really needs to have clear applicability to human health, right? And seeing that translate is super important. So that's why it was important for me. That was the main factor, I think, is just making sure that we see it impact human health. And that was just how I thought I could make the biggest difference. And during that time, so I developed this relationship with this guy, Andrew Smith, who's a computational biologist at USC. And so I was talking to him about some of the things that he was working on. So this is me kind of thinking, oh, what are we going to do next? And he's like, well, I'm doing this really interesting stuff in epigenetics. And I learned a little bit about it, and I thought, oh my God, that's a fascinating field. And I just was drawn to it intellectually. Like, I thought it's super cool. And he said, oh, I'm doing this work in sperm, and giggle a little bit about that. And then he's like, oh, well, I see these differences, really interesting differences between men that have visited infertility clinics, which can typically be older, right? And then graduate students, which are typically a little bit younger, right? And so he saw these differences in regions that were important for neurodevelopment and had been implicated in autism. And we had also seen, and there was also some data that come out looking at populations about an increasing risk of autism in the population, and it was tied to paternal age as well. So older fathers have a higher risk of having children with autism. And I thought, oh my God, right? Is this a potential marker for a risk of autism? And then that turns out to be a really hard question, right, to answer. And thought, okay, well, how are we going to get at that question? So let's think about building up a data set so that we can start to analyze, think about that question. And are there any near-term applications here that we can do? And then, of course, this was all done in sperm, and then there's a lot of data around fertility, and came across this work from Doug Carroll, who's at the University of Utah, and he was doing stuff looking at changes in DNA methylation, which is an epigenetic marker related to fertility as well, fertilization as well as embryo development. Talked to him about it. He said, yeah, no, I think that you could actually use this as a diagnostic test for infertility. And we said, okay, well, that seems like a really near-term opportunity that we can use that to build out a larger data set to start answering these other questions. So Episona was always an epigenetic data company. That was the vision of it. But we had a near-term application of building a diagnostic for infertility, if that makes sense. And so we started, I said, okay, again, we said, okay, what do we need to do that? And we need to develop, there was a lot of proof of concept data out there, but we said, okay, let's really address this head on. And so Doug had a number of samples at Utah, and so we went and did an analysis of that and said, could we build an algorithm to predict whether someone would have a risk for fertilization issues as well as embryo development? And we did that very well, actually. We had a really good predictive model for predicting that particular problem. And so we used that and got the IP that was from University of Utah as well as USC, and built the company out, and then used that to raise capital. And so in this instance, we didn't raise any grant dollars. We actually raised all from dilutive sources. And so this is all angel backed. And so we raised close to $5 million in dilutive financing, which was all from angels, which I'll come back to.
That's very good for an early startup. I've learned a little bit about this recently, and that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I want to bring up an audience question here because it's important. Sure. It came up earlier, but I think this is a great time. Is patents? This audience member asks, how important is it to file patents internationally? Given the cost-benefit analysis, I think it may not be worthwhile. For example, we're not going to leave the wall overseas as a small startup. So, was this part of your thinking?
Yeah. So I'll kind of deviate into IP for 1 second.
I know you're excited to talk about that, so I want to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So there's kind of three references. So back to the EOS stuff. That was a physical technology at the end of the day, right? It was actually a physical molecular structure that we were building, right? It was a plasmid at the end of the day. And so there was IP was essential for that. And we got good IP around that. And so that was important. And we did file internationally. We thought that was important. And I'll get to that more directly in a second. I just want to kind of get some framing. And then the other thing that I wanted to say about the diagnostic stuff is we did take licenses to the IP from USC and Utah. But diagnostic patents are really, really tricky, right? So patenting algorithms and patenting diagnostic capability, which invariably includes naturally occurring phenomena, right? So you're looking for aberrations in the system, right? In the DNA, in this case, and or epigenetics as it be, and you find them, but the problem is that the identification of those is the existence of those is naturally occurring, and you can't patent those, right? There's a couple of rulings that make that impossible. So diagnostics as a whole, and patents and diagnostics as a whole other conversation, are really, really hard to do. I'm also I'm on the board of a company called iStat Therapeutics, which is out of City of Hope, and they have 3 versions of their technology that they've developed. It's an immunotherapy for it's essentially pan-cancer. But the first 2 were filed in US only, And the third version has been nationalized in several countries, so it's international. They tried to go out and raise funds around the second technology with the US only patent years ago, and found it very difficult that companies would say, well, love the technology, but this patent focused on just the US really limits your potential market. So I would say, and you'll hear it, I mean, lawyers, of course, will tell you that because it gives you more fees, right? So, but they're not also just trying to increase their fees, right? They're also doing it because it matters and ultimately is going to lead to higher value. Look, if you have a patent that's meaningful and it's going to protect your technology and give you competitive advantage, which it's better, all right? That's the whole point. Ideally, this is a technology that's going to go into more than one geographic market. US is the biggest market, and that's super important. But I do think filing internationally is absolutely important. I mean, particularly when you're talking about the early phases of this. I mean, nationalization in several countries is expensive, but it's in the grand scheme of like the amount of money it takes to build these types of companies, it's doable. It's doable and worth the extra cost and effort. So I would highly recommend filing internationally. I think each case is its own animal, and you need to think about it separately. And obviously, I am not a patent attorney, just like I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to treat people, and I'm also not going to provide direct patent advice.
Right.
But from my experience, I think international filings that's worth consideration. And talk to your patent attorney. So I know we're starting break against time. So let me just wrap up briefly with Epsona. And so we were able to do the proof of concept work. We were able to raise capital, and there are a couple of, and then we turned our eye towards commercialization, and our investors really pushed us to get it out in the market. So we had kind of a little bit of an internal battle. One was, okay, let's really do full on, and we really raised the money to really validate the technology. And we thought that was important to our market. So our market was the infertility clinics, and infertility clinics, are made up of scientists and clinicians, and they care about the science quite a bit, right? And so they want to see the validation of this particular technology. It was a totally new technology, right? That's the other thing. So that was one part, but then the investors like, well, we really need to see you commercialize this. We really want to see it get out on the market and start selling. And so we sort of agreed toward, we sort of tried to, balance those two things, which was tricky. So that goes back to the investor and board and, team relations. And one thing that we ran into, it gets into the weeds on the technology, but these are run on like microarrays, right? And we had run them on individual arrays, but when we were going to get out into the world, we were going to run an array here, and then temporarily run an array, in a month or a couple of weeks or whatever, right? And so then you have to compare data across different points in time. And this is kind of getting into the weeds, but it's important. You run into massive technical variation across different runs, yep. Right? And no one has this problem in an academic setting because you balance those by spreading them out, and you just do basically one run, right? Or you can control for it if you're going to do it, but we couldn't control for that. And so what we were doing our validation work, and we get some samples, run them, get some samples, run them, and we did like 3 runs, and all of them were brilliant. They matched up well with our algorithm. And then one day we did a run, and the whole thing fell apart. And it looked like we were just seeing it was random. It was basically like whether they were fertile or infertile was just random. And it was like, we didn't know what has happened, right? This is in the middle of validation. We're starting to get our cells ready for commercialization and prepping the clinics and things. And we were like, oh my God, right? This is like a massive technical hurdle to face.
Right.
And so we just all hands on deck, everybody just hunkered down and tried to figure out what was going on. The good news is we figured it out, right? But it did require a whole rethinking of what we're looking at in terms of markers for infertility. But we did actually figure out how to get around that. And so, you know, wipe the brow, we solved that. So that was a problem. And it was, you know, I'll be honest with the investors, they said, yeah, this is scary for us. And you need to figure it out, right? And it's going to be hard for us to put more money into this until you solve this problem, because right now we invested in a company that we thought had solved this particular problem, right? Because the problem with angel investors too can be that they don't necessarily have the technical expertise that they can do the full diligence on. They can understand certain aspects of it, but they don't always get into the weeds. And so again, this goes back to this investor relations, helping them understand, you know, the risks that are involved and being completely honest with all of the risks and potential downside. And you can't always predict what those risks are going to be. We didn't predict this risk. Nobody predicted this risk, but then communicating to them what it is that you're going to do to try to resolve it is super important. And it's a delicate balance. It's a delicate balance. So anyway, we got around that hurdle, and then we started to market and sell it. And so it's kind of two things here that are important, and that was really exciting. So we actually built the technology, commercialized it, started selling it on the market, and that was super exciting for us to see it out in the world. And in many instances, it was very, very valuable to the patients. I'm trying to think of what to say here. So at the end of the day, the market was not ultimately that big. So we were targeting male infertility, and males contribute 50% of in cases of infertility, they contribute 50% they carry 50% of the potential problem. However, you're selling it into a market that is reproductive health or reproductive endocrinologists, and their focus is on women nearly exclusively, right? So they understand that men, you know, can contribute to this problem, but they also are focused on solutions around the female, right? So it was a whole educational problem.
I was going to say, yeah, an educational and a cultural problem that is outside of,
yes,
this is a new sphere. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think on a market perspective, we saw, oh, yeah, like infertility is a huge problem, huge opportunities for us to make a difference here. And there was, you know, infertility is like, it's just financially a big market. It was a cash market too, so we didn't have to worry about a reimbursement as well. And so we thought there was a great opportunity, right? You know, pricing was a whole other, we're obviously not going to be able to touch on everything that I wanted to touch on, but
no, there's actually already 6 questions here that I'm
yeah,
to see if anything applies.
Okay, why do we go to the questions?
Let's do a little bit for the audience here that is watching and listening. So this question is maybe a yes or no. It says, how does the application of IP in biotech change the price of these therapies and drugs for patients?
How does the application of IP in biotech change the price of these therapies? Well, I mean, if I don't know how to answer that. Is the question really? I mean, I'll assume the question is around, does it increase the value of the drug?
I think that's what they're asking. Presumably, there aren't, you know, IP is an integral part of getting a therapy to market.
Yeah, I mean, it's fundamental, and I mean, if the better your IP, the better your value is for the technology and the company. It's just true. I mean, so good IP leads to good value for sure.
The other thing that I was thinking of too, I'm looking at these questions, and you had an experience where you worked at, you founded a startup and it didn't go all the way, and then now you're at another startup and you're taking it much further. You're actually going to commercialization, and you've had a very successful, you know, fundraising experience. So this question is about fundraising from this point forward. So it's not about your experience. What do you think the future looks like as far as fundraising? Is the future in funding from cooperative ventures with universities and is it funding from cooperative ventures and government, or is the future weighted towards funding from private investors? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know what's meant necessarily from cooperative ventures with universities, but I mean, there are what I do see more of happening is that I see a lot of venture firms getting more involved in university relationships, right? And trying to focus on working with the universities to develop technologies. So they're more involved than just like funding externally to that. And I also see, incubators and accelerators becoming much more common. And in fact, investors often will create their own accelerators or incubators too, or partner with. So, that's something that we're certainly exploring. But I think private investment will always be there. And just to speak very quickly to it, I think in the current environment, I don't think in life sciences specifically, right? I think we're in a bit of a bubble. I think we're actually seeing good investment in life sciences. It's continuing. I think the one tricky thing that seems to be brought up is how do you invest in companies when you don't get to meet the founders face to face? And is that a roadblock? And I think it is, right? It sounds like it is. But people are making an effort to get around it, right? They're doing things to try to get around it because I think they do want to make new investments too. But they're certainly still continuing to put money to work. So yeah, the private is going to be. I think you'll see more government effort, but the private will continue.
I think that answers some of the other questions here, which we have a couple of questions that are essentially the same, which is how do you think it's going to change with COVID? So this question I'm going to read out loud is, has the COVID pandemic affected the biotech industry towards developing faster detection, diagnostic technology as opposed to conventional drug, new therapy development? So is there a shift?
Yeah, no, I think the more, I believe this too, and I'm not an investor, but I think, look, if you've started a biotech company or you're working on a biotech company, I think it's best to stick to your technology. You decided to develop this particular technology at one point or another, stick to it. Don't pivot necessarily to try to find a solution to COVID-19. COVID-19 is a huge problem. And in some cases, there's an obvious solution that you can apply from your technology, but don't force it. Really, I don't think that's a good idea. And I think it's much better to focus on your original vision for whatever that company looks like. And I don't think that you're seeing necessarily a shift for investment towards it. I think some money is going towards it. I think it obviously is, and there are opportunities being developed as a function of this problem, and there are good companies and good technologies being developed to get to it and try to help solve it, and money is going to those companies. But I don't think as a founder that I would shift my energies. If I had a company that I had just started, I wouldn't shift my energy towards solving COVID-19 unless it was like I had an infectious disease company to begin with, where I was doing a vaccine that around a coronavirus, and it was actually a relatively simple shift towards this problem. Then it becomes more obvious. But if you have I don't know what the examples are, but I think stick to your guts. What my advice would be there.
I like this question because we're in the final 10 minutes of our conversation, and I did think it was important for us to be able to reflect with you about your experiences, because you have a decade's worth of experience, and a lot of the moments you described sound like they're very difficult in hindsight. In hindsight, they might give you something of value that you can tell us about. So the question is, how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance as an entrepreneur? So how has that changed for you over the years, now that you're the director at LA BioSpace?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's hard whenever I don't know that I worked any harder as an entrepreneur than I did as a graduate student, really. I mean, entrepreneurship is not a 9-to-5 job. I don't think anyone pretends that it is. I think you need family support. I've had good support from my family on this, and they understand it and recognize that it has some unusual hours and ups and downs, and times where you're super busy and times when you're a little less busy. But I mean, I don't know how to answer that. I think you do it. You just make it happen. Like, if you want to spend time with your kids, for example, spend time with your kids. You just do it. right? And I think the other thing is like, I don't feel guilty for doing those things. I found myself feeling guilty about the stupidest things, right? Like, oh, I really should be working when spending time with my family. And I'm like, that is ridiculous. I can't feel that way. That's wrong. So don't feel guilty for doing things that are about you. And it's, now with COVID-19, I'm working from home. It becomes harder to compartmentalize. But I think in different circumstances, I would say try to compartmentalize as much as possible. Go to work, do your work, and if you have to stay long, stay long. But come home and be a spouse and be a father, right? Or a mother. That's what you do, right? And you do those things. Just go 100% in everything. But just 100% when you're doing those things, right?
Yeah. Alan, I have a question for you because I assume that the majority of the people who are who are participating in the webinar are based in LA. What do you see as the advantages of building a business and operating it here in Los Angeles specifically?
Well, I think you have a bunch of, massive intellectual horsepower. I mean, well, let me start with the disadvantages. We're spread out, right? We have a lot of geographic spread, and that's tricky. I think one of the positives of COVID-19 is the ability to understand how we connect when we can't be together in person. And so I think we see this working pretty well, frankly. And so I think that barrier has probably gone away. I think, huge intellectual horsepower, right? I think the universities that we have, there's several major universities that produce really interesting work in Los Angeles. I don't know the numbers, and you guys probably know the numbers pretty well, but the amount of grant funding that comes to the LA region is comparative to what you see up in the Bay Area and Boston. And I also see a massive amount of influx of dilutive or private capital that has come in specifically around life sciences now. So I don't think we any longer have the excuse of like, well, there's not investors here that invest. Not true. There are investors that invest in life sciences and biotech, from therapeutics all the way to more device and kind of hard deep tech, if you will. And so I think, and two, one of the things that I did when I came on at LA BioSpace was just trying to understand the landscape of incubators. And I think when they started thinking about LA BioSpace, there were maybe 2 or 3 incubators. Now we're seeing, I added them up. There's like roughly 18 incubators and accelerators that focus on life sciences. That's from therapeutics to digital health. So there's an infrastructure here. There's a lot of opportunities here, right? So intellectual, infrastructure, capital, I think it's all here now.
Yeah, I hear that. I think it's a matter of time.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's a matter of time. I think we're there, right? I think we're there. I think we need to. I think you guys, right, help bring the communities together and keep us focused as a group and an organization. I think bringing the large so the other thing too is we have large industry. We have Amgen, Kite, Grifols. We have all of these, and Takeda's here. We have large industry here too, but bringing all of those stakeholders together so that we're communicating and working together to build the ecosystem rather than siloed. And I think that comes a little bit from geography, but you guys as the industry organizations bring those stakeholders together so that
That's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a question here that's perfect, I think, for what we're talking about right now, which is how do you envision the future of biotech on the east side of LA and its effect on the surrounding communities? Because you're part of that story now. Presumably, that's why questions being asked.
Yeah. So there's an effort by the county and the city of Los Angeles too to develop particular hubs. And one of the areas that's been talked about is the bioscience corridor, which starts sort of at USC's health science campus and goes all the way to Cal State LA, which LA Bioscience Hub is right smack dab in the middle of as well. And so I think there's been a focus on developing that region. And you have Grifols there, you have USC, you have Caltech, City of Hope is a little bit physically outside of that, but not too much. And so I think there's an opportunity to it's the resources that are there and bringing them together and developing sort of a core or hub. I think is something we're trying to do. And so at LA BioSpace, we're actively trying to develop relationships with organizations that are in our region to build sort of an alliance to work together towards helping startup companies. And as I mentioned before, we are based at Cal State LA and East Los Angeles, and so we are specifically focused on helping entrepreneurs within that region, right? And so we have a huge interest in helping underrepresented entrepreneurs. Like, that's important to us, both from a gender perspective, ethnicity perspective, and a socioeconomic perspective. Those are sort of fundamental core elements of how we think about how we can impact entrepreneurship within the region. We want to see LA thrive, but we specifically are focused on getting East LA, into that story and really contributing. So
that's really exciting to hear about. I have a question here about how to reach you. We're closing in on the last few minutes, so I want to make sure that people that are interested in getting in touch with you are able to do so. What is the best way to get a hold of you to discuss LA BioSpace? When will it be operational to receive / house new startups?
I'm gonna text my email address. Yeah, everybody see that, I assume? You guys get that? So email me. This is the best way to reach me.
I see it.
And so LA BioSpace will be we'll be starting to house companies in January of 2021. We're in the final stages of finishing the construction of the facility. So we're excited. We're really starting to think about the companies that would go in. That's definitely part of the process. And I encourage anyone that has interest and has a company that they're working on to reach out to us. We're focused in life sciences, so that really spans everything from therapeutics to diagnostics to digital health, right? I have a big interest in computational approaches and analytical approaches, so that certainly is something we're interested in, and can have a big impact. So certainly digital health is in there. As I mentioned, we're trying to develop these very specific themes where we focus in on particular areas, and one of those areas is immunotherapy. So not to say that that's some exclusive area, but that's an area of particular interest to us. So if you have a company that's focused in that area, we'd be particularly interested in speaking with you. So yeah, please reach out, and we'll certainly begin. We're looking forward to getting started in January.
It's very exciting.
We'll keep everybody informed too as we progress.
Yes, I think you've managed to reach some people here that will probably find you later and follow up with you. Yeah, that's why we're doing this. So I think that's the end of our conversation for today. It's 10:01. Alan, thank you so much for making time for this. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot about you, a lot more than I did from reading your LinkedIn profile. That's for sure. Thank you so much. And Jordanos, thank you for being an event partner. This has been a pleasure. I'm wondering if you want to plug our next event before we let.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your insights.
Yeah, it's my pleasure as well.
Everyone joining us today. Our next seminar is next Friday, June 26th, same time, 9 a.m. And the topic is career opportunities in the life sciences. We'll have a panel from Thermo Fisher to talk on that topic. So we hope you can join us. And thank you, Sadhna. And thank you for everyone joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sadhna. Thank you, Jordanos. Pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks.